And we are now live.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our second Wednesday in the programming for Where Rivers Meet Spirituality Center. Last week, we were very pleased to begin our series with Ricky DeFoe, and we will continue Ricky's presentations this evening. If you will remember, Ricky's topic is the four directions. So the four directions are usually oriented starting with the east, and then the south, and then the west, and then the north. And each direction is a spiritual center. So the east is the place of the rising sun, where we welcome bird life, where we welcome the new day, where we welcome the spring, where we welcome youth. And then we turn to the south, and this is the period of maturity, the warming sun, the period of summer and heat and passion, and we reflect on our life as a whole. And then we turn to the west, and the west is a time of reaching in. It's the beginning of the dark season. It's autumn. It's a place of harmony. It's a place where the heat of the summer has now lessened, and we have this beautiful autumn. We connect ourselves in some traditions. We connect ourselves to the life in the sea, to the fish and all the mammals and all of the life of the sea. Whereas in the south, we turned our attention to the animals that are of the soft hoof. And so from the south to the west, a place of reflection and compassion, and uh, a place where we begin to look at those, to take stock of everything. And then as we turn north, we turn to the place of the ancestors. As things cool off, it's a time of quieting down, and it's a time of connecting with the complete cycle of things. And not only this, Ricky told us that we celebrate not only the four directions, but we celebrate the sky above and the earth below. And so then that takes in six. And then we celebrate that space in between the sky and the earth where we are. And so we are that seventh centering place. And so last week, Ricky reflected on the East, which in many of the indigenous traditions is the place where we start. And so this evening, Ricky will continue with these spiritual reflections, and then we will have a drumming meditation at the end of our session, and we invite you to pick up your drum, perhaps go on mute, and then engage with us in a silent, at least in terms of Zoom, a drumming meditation. I also want to remind you of the Saturday program. On Saturday, Rick Suter will continue the Qigong meditation, spiritual practices, exercises. And then on Sunday at 9:30, we will have our meditation. So this is our programming for March, and that programming continues with March. Then we will have additional programming as we go into April, and we'll keep you abreast of that. Thank you. Welcome, Ricky.
Miigwech chapchko kogiman. Akwe Anishinaabe Ogaganu na manito. Mgegit sa Anishinaabe Gabujitu at New Nukwesiganan, Tibishku, Saint Ma, Minoa, Giji Gandag, Minoa, Mushkate Washk, Minoa, Mwingashk, Ningi Nukwez, Ningi Nukwez, Weebago, Gegetsa, Kwe, Quiwizens, and they go, Ojibwe Mong, be shun and do them, Nagacho Nang and do Chiba. Gaba iganing in danungum. Apachigo ningida magus in the nigash gae. Gain apachigo gego. Ingi kane dancing. Koyakaji chigeta Anishinaabe. Bungi to go ingi kane dan. Gegetsa in the piteni mugs to go in gyu chiayag. O gikin dasawad. Nibo in gyu. Apne ego. Gawidu kawagasa Anishinaabe. Gikinu Mari Winan. Ani Unagajig. Niwi Tajindam Bangi Gego Osa. Mashkiki. Date beset the Shinakate. Minuadash in Abajia. Wa de we egans. Chi Nagamoyan Bejikigo. Indijigi Kanami go Ricky DeFoe. Nungom Ninga Shagana Shim. Anamika Ginawa. So welcome you all to Where Rivers Meet. My name in English is Ricky DeFoe. And in Ojibwe Guizans, I belong to the Lynx clan. And I reside here on the French say Fond du Lac, the far end of the lake, but the Anishinaabe, we say Nagachuanang, the place where the current stops. And I'm living here in the community of Sawyer, and welcome you in a good way. And I want to talk as the evening goes on a little bit about this thing called the medicine wheel and the significance of it and how it plays out in the teachings of the worldview of Indigenous peoples. And so I don't know a whole lot, but what little bit I do know, I want to share. And it's always good to talk about things that we've already reviewed, that we went over, so we refresh our minds in a sense. No, Mushkiki is medicine, date the bese is to the wheel. Mushkiki date the beset. So Niwi Tazindan, I want to talk about that. Wabanung is the east, and we did that first. And Okogyaman went over those, some of the things that we reviewed in a very good way, well put. We need to think about some of those things again. We know about the color yellow, and we know about tobacco offered. These are significant in the way we carry our life and do things. When the sun comes up, we offer our tobacco, and we start the day in a good way. We know that also that in the smudging ceremony, that entails all of those 4 elements that are critical to life. We know about the earth, wind, and fire, and water. The shell is the water. The smudging is the earth. The smoke is the wind, and of course the match is the fire. So those things are already been done. We acknowledge those every day. We want to do those things often. So we know about the East and representing the beginning, the springtime. And we're looking forward, Ani Zigong. It's coming up to be spring, although it's snowing out a little bit now. It's still, we look forward to some times where people can come out of a time that's perhaps stressful and look for some better times and some smiles and some warmth So we're looking forward to that. And so those things are from the East in the physical aspects. So, and we talked a little bit about the different forms of knowledge, and some talk about epistemology, a way of knowing. We have intergenerational knowledge, we have dream state knowledge, we have ceremonial knowledge, and we have contemporary knowledge. We also talked a little bit about the divisions within any society, particularly this one would be indigenous societies, where you have your traditional people, you have your city folks away from homelands, you have your pragmatists who are assimilated and some are converted, and then you have your descendants, so in indigenous societies. So we want to remember them also in a good way. We talk about the word kweakoshkoin, which is balance, and balance is critical to having good life. Minowin jindiwin is that harmony that we talk so much about, that is very important. We juxtapose that with equality. What is more important? And our elders say that the balance and the harmony is much more important. So then we go on to the South, and we know about the stages of life. We know about the infants and the toddler stage in the East. And now we start to move along into perhaps the early teens. And then we start to understand some things. We know that the color of red is portrayed in most medicine wheels that I've seen, in the teachings that I've gotten, is the color red, mishkwa. And we also know about the fire, ishkode, being from the South. Some have different teachings and lineups of those, but these are what I've been told. And again, we know representing summer. Summer is a beautiful time, and we know that things can be easy if we follow some ways of life that we've been instructed to. We use the medicine cedar from the South, and we always work on some things that are mental. And it's very important because in these times that we have now, which are very, very stressful, we live in a society that is very violent, very sexist, and so we know some things and that we need to have some serenity and peace, and that the mental anguish that comes, the hardships, the stresses. So we know that the South is this way that we can nurture some of those. We know also that each direction has spirit power and physical power, and it's up to you and I to engage in ways to find what those are. And that only comes through relating to one another in those directions, when you call upon those ones to be in ceremony with you. We know, again, the teenage years, young adulthood, there's a lot going on. Things are moving pretty fast. We live in a fast society anyway. Things are at the push of a button, and technology is taking much of the happiness away from our peoples. So we know that things are going extremely fast. Our young people are growing up with experiences that would take us into the 30s, and they're already experiencing these things at such a young age in the teenage years. So we also think ahead a little, and we think about adulthood. What do we want to do? What has our grandparents told us about adulthood and the challenges, and how to solve those challenges and problems that we encounter along the way? So we're always planning ahead. They say, "Ojitan wevene," to prepare carefully. So we do those things, and we know that what lies ahead, because we've listened intently to what our parents have told us, what our grandparents have told us, if we were fortunate, and in turn to what their great grandparents have said. So those teachings come to us through intergenerational knowledge. So again, we plan for that adulthood. Lots of times we experiment. We have to find out who we are as a people, who we are as an individual. So we're experimenting. Some use jewelry, some use tattoos, some are experimenting in different ways to find out their identity. They need to look back. We need to look back and trace who our ancestors are. Each of us comes from a tribe. Even if you're from a European nation, in the days past, long ago, we're tribal people. And it's only been recently that in the past few thousand years that things have become patriarchal and in such a fashion that we find ourselves today. So we're tribal people. So these are things that we know about. So in that tribe, we know about, we're looking to help others. They say, we do koag nadamawag Anishinaabe. So you're helping and you're assisting your fellow people. So these are very important times to, and also in this time that we establish our principles, our values, and our beliefs, and and then they start to become clear to us. Oftentimes we hear our grandparents, our parents tell us these things, and we hear, but sometimes we don't listen. But sometimes somebody else will say the same things, and then it'll start to sink in. Oh, that's what grandpa was saying. That's what grandma was saying. And that's what my parents were saying, the same thing. I should have listened. So we know we start to feel some of those values and beliefs and principles that guide us. This is a socialization process that continues from birth. And we want to recognize the negative aspects of being socialized in a society that is, again, is a very dangerous society. We live in a very stressful society, a very privileged society for some. And so we know that we're socialized into that. And what do we come to believe? Because again, belief is a passive word. We have to find out for ourselves in an active fashion what that really means. Is it true what I'm being told? And oftentimes that's kind of a challenge because it goes against what perhaps your parents have told you about some things to look out for. But when we look and consider the era, the time that they grew up, and then we get a context of the teachings that they had. And it's no disrespect to steer one's own course if we discern that they've been steered in such a fashion that is brings hardships to us or our children. So we can write some ways. First is identifying and recognizing, and then making those changes. So those principles, those values, and those beliefs, we know that each institution we have stems from actions and values. So we have a cosmology, we have a philosophy that stems from that cosmology, and then we have values, and from those values we extend our actions, and our beliefs are manifested in that way with the actions. So this makes up what an institution is. And so we understand about institutions also. So how does that play out? We know again about how fast things are happening at this time. Consider when we were teenagers, the confusion, and also especially with the things that are in place today with the social media in the distance learning and all of these technologies, how they play out and how toxic that can be to a young person, difficulties because of some impersonal things that are happening because of technology. And those are some of the things that we think about as we travel along this mashkiki day to be said, this medicine wheel. And we know that today, this evening, we're talking about the south direction, the medicine cedar and other things. But we know that it is in March, Unabanigi, so, or we know, so we have to acknowledge that it's still the end of winter. And so these teachings could have started in the winter and then went around. But so that tells us that we can, wherever we're at, we just align ourselves in that moment on that medicine wheel. And these things are reminders, and they help us to guide along this thing called life. So I wanted to sound those few things out, review, and then a little bit about how the medicine wheel is used in how life plays out in those difficult moments. They can guide us in how we relate to others, the young and the old also. So it's something to behold. Wherever we're at, we could make a medicine wheel, even drawn it into the sand, and we could make a medicine wheel and start to look for where we're at in life. So I want to thank Okogiman and Where Rivers Meet, the staff, for putting this together, and I think it's a very useful, and it's good to build relationship in this fashion, in a virtual fashion also. But we're looking forward to the days ahead. So if we have any questions and comments, or even constructive criticisms or whatever, please feel free to sound out. And this way we're in dialogue rather than a monologue. It's we can help each other learn.
Yes,
Kogima.
Ricky. Yes, Ricky, thank you. So we want to welcome any questions that you have, and I'll get Ricky started. Ricky, I'll raise up at least two areas that I have an interest in, but we can also, if we see someone else who wishes to get in to ask a question, we can delay my questions. But I'm interested in seasonal stories. So what are the stories of the springtime, and maybe any stories associated with the four directions or the medicine wheel? And so that's one, the seasonal stories associated with the South. And then another area, you mentioned that in the South of our life, after the early youth, we begin to grow, and we are in conversation with our elders, perhaps elders of many generations, and we learn values and beliefs and principles. And you spoke about key values. At some time, I'd like you to identify your understanding of what certain of those key values are. You may have stated these last week. I remember you're giving us some values last week, but key values, key beliefs, key principles. So you use those three words this evening. So again, I'm interested in seasonal stories, and then the values, beliefs, and principles, the key values. So, but I do want to, if anyone would wish to ask Ricky a question, if I see something in the chat, I'll keep my eyes open for the chat. And if you show your image and wish to ask a question, your image, I guess, is not necessary. Just unmute yourself and ask your questions. So, Ricky?
Okay, let's talk about stories. Dibajamo and none. When one tells stories, in most indigenous cultures, is a time for, in the past it was harder, things were harder. The structures of the dwellings were not as dry and warmth and these things, the comforts that we find ourselves in today. So there was a lot, people were together a lot. And being an oral, meaning speaking peoples, you've got to be in earshot. So you got to be close to where everything is being told at a time to, the teachings then were put out there. And this oral tradition, I would argue, is much more important than the written word. The written word is nowadays used as an oppressive tool. And if you write it, then it is basically in stone. So the written word can be used to also be influenced in a political fashion to write some stuff down that is to push someone and socialize someone a certain way. Whereas oral tradition, your stories and the details may differ, but the gist of the teaching will always be there. And that's the most important thing. When one has a way of teaching, a way of learning, and a way of speaking, that is unique and it's different. Each one of us are different. So the way it is of telling stories is different. So, and then if we're telling that story that we've been told by our father and grandfather and the great grandfathers, that is intergenerational knowledge. But with the written word, it could be looked at as plagiarism. So there's a big difference in storytelling. Storytelling is something that is really should not be ignored. These stories that are told by indigenous peoples and the knowledge that they hold. So stories are usually told in the winter time, the sacred stories. There's two kinds of stories. The sacred stories that only can be told when snow and in the winter, snow is on the ground, and also just plain Dibajimoanan, the stories. So the sacred stories would be told in the teachings that they entail, whether that's the 7 of the teachings that we talked about earlier: wisdom, love, respect, bravery, honesty, humility, and truth, and those other ones, if they entail that, or else regular stories. Now, stories are also, because individuals, perhaps like this, if you know you've never met this individual, but you've heard many, many stories about that individual. So you've heard what their values were: courage, courageous acts, where they would defend the people, and kindness. So you'd hear all of these attributes of this individual, but you never met this individual. So these are stories, and we become part of those stories. We are a part of the story also when we begin to engage and we tell stories. So anybody can tell these stories, these dibajimonan, about the family and things. So I think it's important to be a part of the story. And it's a beautiful moment when we get the attention of others and being able to tell a story, whatever that teaching entails. And again, there are songs so when one is praised in the community, somebody might compose a song for that individual. Somebody will tell stories about that individual, and then they will be passed on. Again, you never know that individual personally, but you know what they stood for and whose family tree they've come from. That's the significance of stories, whether they're sacred stories or the ones that are in a winter, and other stories can be told all the time.
And
The
Ricky,
values. Go ahead.
sorry, Ricky. Related to that, Vicky asked the question about how traditions, language is passed on from generation to generation. And I assume that certainly telling stories and participation in the rituals and what, would you say something about the intergenerational sharing of language and traditions and the learning of language? And I know right
Yes.
now so much has been lost, and so how is that done now, that under changed circumstances where people are not necessarily living the traditional way anymore?
The Gichia Giekadog Akinige go Gayabe o ma ya magad. Gidin way winning nan Minwa Anishinaabe Ajichi game. Gayabe o ma ya magad. The elders say that everything is still here. We haven't lost it. Our language is still here. The culture is still here. So we know, and we listen to what our elders have told us. Although there's many challenges to revitalize and revive some of the language and culture, there's a lot of social forces at work, particularly like the medium, social media, even these phones and these computers. This technology has a way of getting the attention of our young people, so much so that they're almost addicted to these technologies, and we have to pry them away from these and then they get mad when we take the phones or the tablets and the things away. So there's many challenges out there that are today. The elders say that the only time that we really have their utmost attention is in ceremony. So we try to bring them to ceremonies to revitalize those ceremonies, whether they're naming ceremonies, marriage ceremonies, the sweat lodge ceremony, or the send-off ceremonies, or the ceremonies of your first kill, your first take and sharing to the community. There's lots of ceremonies that we got to revitalize. So, and we're doing that. And so I think that because of the challenges, those victories, when we do have our young people speaking our language, even piecemeal by piecemeal, day by day, we start to make progress. And those are the victories that we share as a community. And we know of our connection to the ancestors. And so they're watching. So it's up to us to do our part in revitalizing those ceremonies and continuing to speak our language on a daily basis and to engage one another. So although there's challenge is, I think the people are up for challenges because know that to cease to resist the assimilation of mainstream America, to cease to resist is to die, and not only physical, but the death of the imagination, the death of the ability to care for each other. And I'm talking not only about indigenous peoples, I'm talking about all peoples, because we are a species. So, and the difficulties that we face today, I think in global and the environment can be solved by returning to indigenous worldview and ceremonies, because in ceremonies, in language, the archaic languages is the true relational piece and true concepts of what it means to live in a spiritual world with those others. So we're truly all connected. So there's answers there along with the challenges. And we just got to do our part. We have grandchildren around. We utilize the language. We utilize the ceremonies. The children and others will learn by watching the things that we do. So we've just got to do those things, and we're doing them.
Ricky, is there any formal education in the language? I know that in some communities, and even at some of the colleges, one of the languages, depending upon the area, one of the indigenous languages may be taught, Dakota or whatever it might be. Is that so in your area? And is it in the schools? Has there ever been a conversation about about having the teachings in school?
Some folks have had that conversation. I've listened to it and been engaged in it also myself, in the sense that some would argue for and against that. The ones that are for it is to say that we're losing it at such a rate that it has to be institutionalized. The ones that are against it don't want it to be institutionalized in the school. And there's drawbacks to that, because when we think about the numbers of indigenous peoples, do we, with all the appropriation of culture and things, do we share the innermost intimacies of our language and our culture with other groups? Those are questions that are asked all the time. And there's a difference between first language speakers and second language speakers, and you can tell immediately when they begin to speak. And I'm a second language speaker. So the first language speaker knows that I'm a second language speaker, no matter how proficient you are, because for the first 2 years of your life, you're hearing English. So when you speak, you always have that English sound, even in Anishinaabe Moan. So it is. And so there's that, you can tell the difference of that. And now we went from an oral language to one that is written. And one that is written, for instance, when I went to the few days that I went to college, I sat next to a guy. He was a junior. I was a freshman. He had freshman English and sophomore English out of the way. I didn't have English. So they're teaching Ojibwe language through the medium of English. So you had to be a proficient, fluent English speaker to understand the way it's being taught. So it creates lots of micro insults. So you'd have a non-native understanding the way it's taught, a double vowel system, Firo double vowel system, a way of writing the language. So you'd have a non-native sitting right next to me, grasping the intricacies of the language and speaking it. And then what does that do to the native next to him, that there has been not only a genocide against the people as ancestors, but it continues to the extermination and all of those hardships continue to be perpetuated onto him and his family. So there's shame there. So even though there's in a push for colleges to the language, there's also, it's a really complex situation that is playing out, because there's also the concept of whiteness going on, where white folk will begin, or even other folks that have this embedded in them, whiteness will kind of be superior than the others and look down upon ones that are, we see that play out here on the reservation because the young people are proficient second language speakers, some of them, and then the elders that are 70 years old that perhaps are Madei and got a PhD and is female, the younger ones that are proficient, so will look down upon the elder that cannot speak fluent or proficient or language. That is what we call generational trauma being perpetuated through the use of our language, because they get it, they've grasped it, they've only lived 15, 20 years in English, and the elder is 60, 70 years old, so they've been immersed in English for 70 years, and then they're gonna, so they were told when they're young not to speak the language, and then they didn't speak the language, and they got all of that stuff, pragmatic fashion, PhD, Madei, all of those things like that, and some have even converted, and so now they come back to grasp the language, and now the young people are perpetuating that trauma once again, so they're being re-traumatized. That dynamic is also playing out through the use of the double vowel system, and so an elder and a 20-year-old, the amount of English that went into them. We know that English is a foreign language, immigrant language, and a settler language. And that when we try to translate to English, they're only half truths. They're not no real, the depth of the meaning is not doing any justice. So that's a challenge. So within each of those words, just for instance, Gichi Ode o Gichi Da, one thinks is a warrior, but Gichi Ode is a grand heart. Ode, Gichi Ode. So within those words, we need to seek and go back as an infant hears that again. So to re-embed that in our mind. Those are challenges. We recognize those, we identified those, and we're working through those and making tremendous progress.
Thank you, Ricky. If there are other questions and they want to appear, if you'd like to have that appear in the chat, I can see it right away, or if you'd like to verbalize it, please do. Ricky, I'm wondering about our finding of the divine, the great mystery, in the South. So when I pray the four directions when I turn to the South. What might my prayer look like in the South?
Well, we know about the summer. We know about the medicine cedar. We know about the fire. We know about the songs of the birds. So recognizing those and sounding out those and being grateful for that relationship with those ones, to reconnect. Too often we ask. They tell us to pray every day. Some days we don't have nothing to ask for, but we just want to give. So we give thanks. There's never enough thanks given, particularly through our young people. So we need to give that gratitude for this moment that we got, this day we've got together, the friendships that we've developed. And again, those ones from the south, whatever animal that is in part of that medicine wheel, whether it's the wolf or whether it's the turtle, we acknowledge them also. And again, those ones are up to us to find out. And and that's the beauty of it. So we can say and name some things, but for instance, the five senses, we know about the five senses, and then the touch. Some indigenous peoples talk about there's four spiritual senses also. And perhaps they are in those directions. So it's up to you and I then to seek them out and to sit still and listen. And they say aman nisoin is that intuition, that sixth sense, if you will. So we all have that. And you cannot find that if you got headphones on, if you got the phone on, the computer on, you're hearing all this noise from social media. You've got to be quiet and away from all the chaos, and then you'll start to hear. But
Ricky?
Just to be there in relationship. And yes.
Yes, one thing I'm hearing is, for instance, if I'm praying to the south, then I'm understanding, first of all, what is in the south, and then I might give gratitude for that. So I'm praying, offering thanks for the summer, offering thanks for the summer of my life, for all the things that this summer of life have given me.
Yes.
Naming that. I'm thinking about maybe all the animals, especially the soft-hooved animals that are associated with the South. I'm thinking about in the South, maybe the sorrows that my life has brought to others. And so then I'm expressing a sorrow and asking forgiveness. So this is some of what I'm thinking about as you tell me to relate to those things that are found in the South. And so now one of the things that I will be not necessarily at this time is I want to find out more of what if the five senses, or if any of the senses are associated with the four directions, and if so, what sense might be associated with what direction. So I just also find that a interesting thing to look at.
Yeah. We know about the emotions that are there, the spiritual, mental, the physical. We know about those four: physical, spiritual, mental, and emotional. And the southern piece that's why we talk about earlier about the mental aspects and the mental health issues that are plaguing us now, being locked in and away from each other. Now is a good time to take a look at this concept in American culture that says, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and individualism is the way to be, because this is the strength. We don't need anybody else. And I think you'd find that today, those thoughts have no meaning or no place. We really need each other. We need to be in relationship with one another. We need to see and feel and those things. to feast with one another, to ceremony with one another, to cry with one another, to laugh with one another. We need that. So this mental health piece is, we're at a struggling time in American culture. So to recognize that then is to seek the proper ways to deal with that, the mental piece.
Thank you. Yes, I do remember your identifying the mental as being associated with the South, that direction, and I hadn't heard that before. So I'll want to be and inviting others to reflect on the ways that we connect to the mental, to express gratitude for that, and then consider what we will need to do to have balance and harmony in terms of the mental. Just, in reflection and meditation, what is required of me to be whole mentally.
Most often we can get direction from the elders, and again, you've got to be in relationship with them. You cannot just call them up or text them. This is so impersonal. It's actually a way of disrespect, in my view, that you can you imagine texting a grandfather or great grandfather, that really the technology has just really been in the past 20 years or so. So these things, although many are literate in computer and technology, but the impersonal piece of that. So you got to travel to there and be in presence. That's what spiritual connection is about, being present. And so technology is very helpful, but it can be very damaging to relationships. Because when we think about those environments.
Thank you, Ricky. We have about 4 minutes left in our hour, and we're inviting you, asking you, Ricky, if you would kindly bring us into a drumming meditation.
Okay, let me get some water here first, a moment. Okay. Again, see if we make some progress on that song, that directional song. Anishinaabe, way ya, way ya, way ya, way ya, way ya, way ya, way we are, way away. In the game, make it see money too. In the game, make it see money too. Way ya, way ya, way ya, way ya, way we are, way away. Anishinaabe, way ya, way ya, way ya, way ya, way ya, way ya, way we are, way away. Pindagan, maingan manito. Pindagan, maingan manito. Way ya, way ya, way ya, way ya, way we are, way mashkute bijiki manito. Way away 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 away. Way away. Anishinaabe, way away. Way away 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 away. Way away. In the game, makwa manito. In the game, makwa manito. Way away away away. Way away. Way away. Way away. Way away. In the game, ich bin manito. In the game, ich bin manito. Way away 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 away. Way away. In the game, Mama Nanaki. In the game, Mama Nanaki manito. Way away away away. Way away. Anishinaabe, way away. Way away 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 away. Way away. In the game, Gije manito. In the game, Gije manito. Way away away away. Way away. Way away away. Way away. Way away. Good job, Chico. Bisnda, yak. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Ricky.
I just wanted to thank you also.
You bet. You're
Thank you,
welcome.
everyone, for being with us this evening. Ricky, we look forward to your being with us next week as you give us teachings on the West, the direction of the West. We look forward to that. That is one of the directions that I especially gravitate toward, that deepening of the West. And so we look forward to seeing and being with you all next week, Wednesday at 7 p.m. So thank you so very much for being with us this evening. Those who are able to see here, Barb and Vicky, and I saw Dale and others that are on the YouTube. So a good evening to you